Hello, my name's Nigel Thorne and I'm concerned at how the Welsh Government are imposing queer theory on society with the goal of making Wales the most LGBTQ plus friendly nation in Europe. In a Mumsnet post on the 18th of October 2018, anonymous user The Harpy Sings posted notes about her attendance at a conference titled We're Still Here in London on the 8th of September 2018. 1. Health Panel. Chair was Dr Ben Vincent of Gyres. Then there was discussion about trans children. Dr Vincent was very scathing about GIDS, said there was disgusting and unethical practices. Ben Vincent spoke about dispelling the myths about desistance and the myths of rapid onset gender dysphoria. Ben Vincent called this concern trolling, malicious and ethically bankrupt. Ben Vincent would like a review of the whole system. Then Dr Vincent said that they'd received a copy of Born in Your Own Body, edited by Heather Brunskill-Evans and Michelle Moore. Vincent is reviewing it for some Royal College and said, "I will tear it a new arsehole." Also, Vincent is planning a book called TERF Wars, which will be a rigorous takedown of TERF arguments, which is getting serialised as article in some peer-reviewed journal. TERF Wars was indeed published in 2020. Vincent was a co-author. The book states, in 2018, the UK government held a public consultation on Gender Recognition Act reform. The effect, however, was a backlash against the proposed changes. Leading up to the consultation, multiple campaign organisations were founded to specifically resist self-determination as the mechanism by which birth certificate sex marker can be changed. Organisations including A Woman's Place UK, Fair Play for Women, Mayday for Women, We Need to Talk and the Lesbian Rights Alliance held meetings across the UK, building a new trans-exclusionary feminist movement that also rapidly expanded online through digital platforms such as Twitter and the Mumsnet Feminist Chat message board. To understand the nature of the backlash, two important points are worth unpacking regarding what exactly is being opposed and espoused by groups like Women's Place UK and Fair Play for Women. The first concerns how sex and gender being operationalised. A central concept mobilised by these organisations is women's sex-based rights, and this concept is used in ways that emphasise the distinction of sex as biological or material reality from gender as social role or ideology. Organisations opposed to gender self-determination have argued not only that there is a clear distinction between sex and gender, but also that UK laws such as the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act 2010 should be interpreted in such a way that trans women are understood as male, trans men as female, and non-binary people as implicitly delusional. That is to say, the view of these organisations is that while gender may be subject to change, sex is immutable. Notably, this position ignores decades of feminist scholarship, which argue that gender and sex are discursively co-constituted. These decades of feminist scholarship, which argue that gender and sex are discursively co-constituted, is queer theory. Ben Vincent has had a massive influence on Sophie Quinney, the clinical director of the Welsh Gender Service, and has contributed to Health, Education and Improvement Wales training modules. On the HEIW website, it states, the new modules have been written by Dr Sophie Quinney, a GP with a special interest in trans health, with support from the academic Ben Vincent. Celebrating the launch, Professor Pushpinder Mangat, Medical Director, HEIW, said, "These are our first training modules for health professionals around the care of trans and non-binary people. We are really grateful to Stonewall Cymru for working in collaboration and supporting HEIW with their development." In an interview with Moms for Liberty, James Lindsay explained queer theory.
Queer theory is really, I mean, at a Turning Point event last year, their America Fest or whatever they do in December, I sat on the stage with Charlie Kirk and I said the queer theory opens the gates to hell. And I kind of mean that as close to literally as I can. Queer theory is, as you said, it is a critical theory. It's derived from this weird fusion of kind of critical Marxism, which is another name for critical theory, and sex positive feminism, as these were stewing around in the 1980s, especially within the subset of sex, this gets all complicated, subset of sex positive feminists who are also butch lesbians. And so they were really concerned with the fact that, they don't want to have to act like a woman just because they happen to have certain parts. And they didn't want to be, discriminated against and so on, if you want to kind of give them a charitable interpretation of what they were about. And so they called in 1984, a woman named Gail Rubin called for a new radical politics of sex and sexuality in a paper called Thinking Sex. And this is really where queer theory was born. And what it is it's a way of looking at the idea that society constructs a concept called normalcy or being normal. And certain people assign themselves the status of being normal. That gives them privileges in society. They get, they're not considered freaks or perverts. They can have jobs. They can dress the way that they normally dress at their jobs. They would call the
cis hetero. Whatever.
Yes, the cis hetero whatever. And yes, and you have to say the whatever because they can just keep tacking on more and more prefixes to make more and more designations if they wanted to. And so they oppress people outside of that realm of normalcy by virtue of creating the category of normal versus abnormal. And that category can be normal with regard to sex, normal with regard to sexuality, normal with regard to gender identity. And like I said, the mere act of categorization oppresses people. In fact, they call it a violence of categorization. It does violence to people who don't fall within that realm. So in a sense, queer theory is a war on the normal, is what it is.
Who did they say is making these categories?
Society at large. And so this is really complicated. This is their idea. This is Judith Butler's idea of, let's say, gender performativity coming into play. So for Judith Butler, who is kind of the fairy godmother of queer theory, even though I just mentioned Gail Rubin as the person who wrote the first paper, Judith Butler really advanced the ideas at the beginning really the most. And her two big books were in 1990 and 1993. The first one was called Gender Trouble, and the second one is called Bodies That Matter. And in these books, she lays out this whole idea of gender performativity. And the idea is that gender only becomes real because we put it on like a play, and not quite like a play. There's this older idea in philosophy. This takes a lot of unpacking because it's really weird. So I'm sorry we have to do this for a minute. No, it's good.
This is what people like. I like the unpacking of it. So go for it.
Yeah, we have to go backwards. There's a guy, J.L. Austin, before Judith Butler, who was investigating this idea of performance of roles in society and came up with this concept of performativity. So you could take the idea of a judge or a police officer or something like this and in his professional capacity. So, maybe this guy, maybe he's your next door neighbor, maybe he's just Joe, right? Or whatever, Joe the judge. And you know him, but he's Joe and he's just cooking burgers and, hanging out with his kids or whatever he does as Joe, working on his car. But then he puts on the black robe and he goes and he sits at the bench and now he's Your Honor, right? And he speaks a certain way and he sits a certain way and he dresses a certain way and he acts a certain way. Same thing with your buddy, Billy, who happens to be a doctor. He's Billy at home and then he puts on the white coat and the next thing you know, he's a doctor, right? And so you become the professional role. The professional role, Austin was saying, doesn't really exist. It's not a real thing. It's a performance that people do when they adopt that role and they teach that performance to other people. So judges kind of groom future judges into being judgely, and doctors groom future doctors into acting like doctors would. And there's this performativity that brings out the existence of that role. And Judith Butler saw this like, that's what gender is, which is absolutely crazy. She said that people are born into the world. Some of them have male genitalia, some of them have female genitalia, or chromosomes, or gametes, or whatever level of sex identification you want to go with. And then society is like, well, this is what little boys do, and this is what little girls do. And then the people that are saying that, though, just like the judge is performing the judge role, is performing the role of man or woman and teaching the child to perform the role of man or woman. And this whole elaborate scheme of performing the roles of man and woman is what shapes the little girl to grow up as a girl and into a woman, and the boy to grow up as a boy and into a man. And it kind of creates a reified, a fake thing made real out of gender and gender identity. And we're all actually just performing it. So if you performed it differently, you could disrupt that system. And now you start to see where queer theory has these ideas about drag queens and not just transvestite in a dressing across, but also, transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, gender non-conforming. We'll skip some of the other terms they use because they like to throw the F word into a lot of their theory, quite literally. It's even weird using the word queer the way that they do after so many years of it being just a slur, but they throw the F-bomb into things. Gender effing, for example, is a deliberate activity that they undertake to make gender more complicated and more weird. And so this is sort of where these ideas come from. But what it is it's a Marxist theory of sex, gender, and sexuality, or a Marxist theory of normalcy is what it boils down to.
Yeah.
The normal is a special privileged status that some people give themselves to exclude other people. Those people are called queer. They can seize that name for themselves, use it as a positive discourse of resistance. They can take up queer activism to disrupt the normal through various performative and other means. Judith Butler recommended politics of parody. So you mock what gender roles are by exaggerating them and being sarcastic.
Like a drag
and making
queen, kind of.
Like a drag queen. Yes, exactly. And the goal is to disrupt the categories themselves so that normal loses its meaning. Where Karl Marx said that the point of communism can be summarized in a single sentence, which is to abolish private property, Judith Butler didn't say, but could have said that the point of queer theory could be summarized in a single sentence, which is to abolish the concept of normalcy at all.
Ben Vincent is autistic and identifies as non-binary. The Harpy Sings continues. Dr. Stuart Lorimer of the Tavistock and Portman, who was also a panellist, said that rapid onset gender dysphoria is evidence-free. Lorimer is a gender clinician at the Welsh Gender Service. He has also set up a private clinic, GenderCare, that provides surgery for trans and non-binary patients to allow them to be their authentic self.
Hello, I thought I'd do an update on how things are going in terms of my experience with GenderCare, going privately in the UK. I'm non-binary, identify kind of with terms transmasculine, mostly agender, but there's a little bit of fluidity there. So yes, I have had an appointment with Dr. Lorimer. He was lovely. He seemed very knowledgeable. He did ask quite a few kind of gatekeeping questions that are a bit uncomfortable, and you kind of lay on this whole thing of like, yeah, when I was a kid, I was always a tomboy, and I didn't like girl things. I have more dresses, blah blah blah, and it's kind of ridiculous that you have to, but it just feels a lot easier if you kind of go with the narrative that that they or people who would be criticising their work would understand, I suppose, as being the narrative that they want you to have had. He was super, super lovely, had a really nice time. My partner came with me to the appointment, and it didn't feel like anything particularly formal even. We just had a chat, and it was a really good experience for my first appointment.
Lorimer wrote the foreword to Vincent's book on transgender health. Hannah Blythin is aiming to create a Wales where everyone feels free to be their authentic self.
We want to create a Wales where everyone feels free, supported and safe to be and live their lives as their authentic selves.
In his interview with Moms for Liberty, James Lindsay explained how queer theory was cultural Marxism.
The best way to think of it is to think of Marxism like a computer program. I mean, this is a dorky thing, but it's an operating system on your computer. Like if you have an Apple, it's running, iOS, and iOS does what iOS does. And it doesn't matter what program iOS is running. It doesn't matter if you've opened Safari. It doesn't matter if you've opened Skype. It doesn't matter which one you've opened. And so with Marxism, what Marx did before he wrote Capital, before he even wrote the Communist Manifesto, which was in 1848, is he wrote these other treatises, like in 1844. He wrote a lot, and they're extremely religious. And what he did was he laid out the architecture that is what, in my opinion, is the real essence of what Marxism is about, and that's the operating system, which is what you're saying. There's this stratification of society. There's this idea that anywhere you find hierarchy is creating benefit for the people on top and oppression for the people below. The people on top rig the system to keep their benefit, even if they don't know it. The people on bottom are taught through ideological means to believe that they're stuck where they are, or they're supposed to be where they are, or they should accept where it is. That's Marx's famous line about religion being the opiate of the masses. It numbs you to your suffering so that you won't rise up and end the causes of your suffering. That's actually the argument he's making. And he made that in January of 1844 in a critique of Hegel. Later in 1844, he writes in the Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts that the idea is to transcend private property entirely, to get to a true communism where man realizes his true essential nature as a social being, which as a social being, there's no longer any hierarchy. So it's a man without hierarchy that you're actually trying to get to. And he saw private property by that point as the thing that's causing the issue. But this software, this operating system can run any software. So if you take and plug in, the economic software, you get what people call classical Marxism. Oh, it's about economics, it's about, capital, it's about capitalism, blah, blah, blah. But you can unplug that and you could plug in race. And then you have whiteness as a special kind of property. And you have white people that created the categories of race the way they are to give themselves this advantage and preserve it for themselves. People of color are excluded. They need a racial consciousness awakened so that, the whole thing, right? And so you can plug in race. Well, you can plug in normal as well, being considered normal. And that kind of starts with Michel Foucault, who's talking about madness and homosexuality. And that's who the postmodern philosopher, and that's who these so-called post-structuralist feminists who gave birth to queer theory had really turned to. Predominantly was the postmodernist Michel Foucault, who was trying to say that no matter how we've categorized homosexuality in the past, it's always been a disaster and it's always going to be a disaster. Yeah. And their main mechanism of abolition then is for queer theory is to queer things, which is to make them complicated, to make them so complicated that people throw up their hands and say, I can't answer what a woman is. That's not possible.
In an article written for Women's Rights Network, the author stated, on Saturday, the 21st of October 2023, the Women's Equality Network in Wales and Elect Her hosted an event at the seat of the Welsh Government, the Senedd. This event came with much fanfare and publicity and was called We Belong Here. The hosts invited women to join them as we bring women together to connect, mobilise and champion their role in Welsh democracy. Wales WRN, along with sister groups Merched Cymru, LGBT Alliance Cymru and Outspoken Women, among others, have been attempting to connect with elected Senedd members on issues of serious concern to women for a long time, but have been roundly ignored and dismissed. The first session was held in the Senedd chamber, with only a lucky few admitted, the rest being in the viewing gallery. The panel included Hannah Blythen, the minister who has introduced the reality-denying, women-erasing, same-sex attraction-destroying LGBTQ plus action plan, Joyce Watson, MS, the leader of the so-called Women's Caucus, and Sinead Williams. The questions had to be submitted beforehand, electronically. Will it come as a surprise that none of the questions we submitted were asked or the topics touched on? Not a single question on sex-based rights, only safe, pre-written sounding questions were asked. There was no engagement with the audience, and for those of us in the chamber, our microphones had been switched off. I asked Hannah Blythen the critical question of how the Gender Quotas Bill would define the word woman. After a look that would turn a lesser woman to stone, her response was that this has not yet been decided upon. So I asked, did she envisage trans women, men who self-identify as women, being on women-only shortlists? She stated that the Welsh Government's position is that trans women are women. When I said that they're men, her response was, no, they're not men, they are women, and that is a broader discussion, and walked away. Under the guise of transgender inclusion, the Welsh Government is pushing queer theory into Welsh schools, part of a whole school approach, as specified on a Cardiff University website. Children will not be taught that sex is biological and gender is a social construct, as a previous generation was taught instead. Following the writings of Judith Butler, children will be taught that gender is an identity and that sex is something that is attributed to them. The Harpy Sings continues. 2. Education Panel. The panel's recommendations was to get the pro-gender extremist philosophy in at school governor level and find allies. Ysgol Calon in Powys describes itself as the school at the heart of Wales. It has 2 campuses, one in Builth Wells, the other in Llandrindod Wells. School governors there are seemingly on board with pro-gender philosophy. The school have a LGBTQ+ inclusion policy written in consultation with Stonewall Cymru, Just Like Us, and partner school for LGBTQ+ inclusion, Ysgol Pendrahafod School in Swansea. The document states, Ysgol Calon Cymru are very proud to show their support for LGBT inclusivity. We fully support equality and diversity for all. The intent of this policy is to provide an inclusive environment in which pupils and staff who identify as LGBTQ+ are valued and respected, to understand the individual needs and support of our LGBTQ+ staff and pupils, to ensure that the school's curriculum is LGBT inclusive in line with Curriculum 2022 and RSE, to monitor and tackle HBT language and bullying. In the context section of the document, it states, discussions around gender identity can cause confusion for many, not because they have an issue with it, but more they don't know how to address the language that's appropriate and acceptable to use. Well, some people do have an issue with it. Although school staff and pupils, apparently, have no issue with it at all.
stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, 'cause we don't want your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away, they say, no one will love you as you are. But I won't let them send the blood, gonna drown him out. I am brave, I am bruised, I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come. And I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me.
In the acknowledgements section of the document, it states, as Ysgol Calon Cymru adapts in preparation for Curriculum for Wales 2022, LGBT inclusivity will now be part of those adaptations. We, as a school, believe that this policy will not only give support to our LGBT plus staff and students, but support our students in becoming safe, healthy, resilient, learning, fulfilled, and have their voices heard, valued, and acted on. A personal thank you goes to Pentre Hafod School for allowing us to work with them with our LGBT Pride project and giving us the opportunity to see what an LGBT policy looks like. We would like to extend a thank you to Just Like Us and Stonewall Cymru for their fantastic resources that are now available to our students and staff. And we very much look forward to future collaborations. The document links to the websites of Just Like Us, Stonewall Cymru, Gyres and Mermaids. The Harpy Sings continues. Helen Webberley then said she'd seen so much suffering of trans kids and asked about how to help kids who were trans who couldn't face going to school. Helen Webberley is a doctor from Abergavenny who was convicted in 2018 of running an independent medical agency, online GP services, without being registered. Following the ruling, Webberley registered a company overseas named GenderGp. In an article from 2020 titled "To Treat or Not to Treat When Doctors Put Politics Before Patients," Webberley compared herself to Sophie Quinney, the clinical director of the Welsh Gender Service. When it comes to transgender care, the UK operates a network of specialist clinics. These clinics were set up to manage a cohort of patients, which has since grown exponentially, rendering the small capacity of the specialist clinics unfit for purpose. So, an alternative route is being trialled via the introduction of various satellite clinics throughout the UK. One such clinic is situated in Wales, my hometown, and ironically the birthplace of GenderGp some 5 years ago. The clinic aims to assist those trans individuals who ordinarily would have had to travel to London for their care. The service will provide support, advice and prescriptions in cases where Wales-based GPs refuse to care for their trans patient. The doctor in charge of this particular clinic, Sophie Quinney, is being hailed as a local hero, and I couldn't agree more. Any doctor who actively seeks to improve care for any underrepresented patient cohort is indeed a hero. In Sophie's case, she has managed to bridge the gap between NHS and trans care without becoming a social pariah, in the same way that so many have before her, including myself. So what is it that separates the two of us? Why is it that her approach has been given the NHS stamp of approval? Well, my approach, which started as a simple bridging service, met with roadblocks at every turn. When I compare our situations, it is abundantly clear. I see two progressive, trans-friendly GPs. Both Dr. Quinney and I have taken a long, hard look at the state of trans healthcare in the UK, and we have said it is not good enough. We both chose to do something about it, albeit via different routes. We have both worked incredibly hard to change the face of transgender healthcare for the better, one from within the NHS and one from outside the NHS. In a document produced for the Policy Exchange, research fellow Lottie Moore writes, "There are a growing number of private gender clinics in the UK. GenderGp is a private clinic based in Singapore which offers gender services to children online. Patients can pay a one-off fee of £195, which covers unlimited medical advice and private prescriptions. This fee enables a patient to begin their medical transition. There is no obligatory counselling or assessment required of patients in order to begin their medical transition, aside from a one-off information gathering session which takes place online. Counsellors that conduct these sessions are not medically qualified. The founders of the clinic, Dr Helen Webberley and Dr Michael Webberley, were found guilty of medical negligence in a tribunal in May 2022 for providing inadequate care to gender-distressed children. In June 2022, Helen Webberley was suspended from practicing for 2 months, while Dr Michael Webberley was struck off the medical register. The clinic remains in operation. The Welsh Government appear to have an ambivalent attitude to GenderGp. Although they have not explicitly approved the company's activities, a link to a Welsh Government document hosted on a GenderGp server was sent in response to a Freedom of Information request. The Harpy Sings continues. Notable misogynist Adrian Harrop then chipped in asking about transgender trends school pack and how we can stop the sick filth getting into schools. Adrian Harrop has been a very active trans activist. In 2021, he was suspended by the General Medical Council for 1 month because of his harassment of people on social media. Harrop works for the Welsh Gender Service. In her book, Girls, Boys and Junior Sexualities, Exploring Children's Gender and Sexual Relations in the Primary School, Professor Renold writes about queering childhood by queering the binary oppositions of male and female and adult and child. James Lindsay comments.
On the other hand, there's this big trend within all of this theory to just have the most crazy avant-garde thing, to make everything everybody realize that everything's a social construct. So if you obliterate the barrier between male and female, or obliterate the barrier between adult and child, well, you've really done something amazing. If you've reconstrued that in terms of social constructivism, that which is so clearly a manifestation of physical reality, then you've really achieved something. So there's this weird academic side to it too. There's also a weird narcissistic side that feeds into it. It's, you see this a lot with queer theory, which is that where you're actually heading is toward, I get to choose my own identity, and I can kind of groom the people around me into the identities that I want them to have to become my narcissistic supply. And so again, you see kind of another pathology at the heart of this that isn't necessarily about pedophilia at that point. It's about, and I think you're going to see some pedophilia issues around all this drag queen stuff. All of it's going to start coming out eventually. Some of it already has.
Yeah, we've already seen several stories recently. There was some drag queen that goes by Diamond something or other who was just charged with several counts of child pornography. And if that were the only case, okay, but we've seen several of those headlines in the past few years.
There will be a lot.
The queering of childhood is being pushed heavily. On the 13th of August 2023, the Daily Telegraph reported that the Welsh Government funded a drag queen story hour event run by Aida H Dee, whose real name is Sab Samuel. Samuel has courted controversy. He has raised funds for the funeral of a convicted child sex offender, and he posted a photograph of a male backside with "Ada was here" written upon it. Nevertheless, Samuel does see himself as a role model for queer 5-year-olds.
It's very lovely. It's very lovely. But the fact that I am a role model for 5-year-olds now, I think that says a lot personally. And, I have gained a lot of little fans very quickly. which I want to say is obviously it's a compliment to me and what I do, but I also want to say I think it's more. It's just very, very, very clear that a role model for queer children, a role model for young queer people, are so few and far between that all it takes is just even one person to do something that they become so incredibly loved by these people. So I'm just evidence that there needs to be more of me, you know.
There is no such thing as a queer 5-year-old. In a tweet Samuel posted, "Today I watched a dad buy some trans pride stickers for his little girl, maybe aged 3 or 4. The dad asked, 'Do you know what trans means?' The little girl replied, 'Yeah, it's when a girl is actually a boy or a boy is actually a girl. Duh.' And transphobes think this stuff is too complex for children. Come off it." In another tweet, he posted, "I love lesbians. My recent book was about 2 lesbians, but nobody gets to play gatekeeper to what defines who a lesbian is." Some lesbians he doesn't love.
I would guess, just to be fair to this, that the predominant proportion of the drag queen phenomenon is actually raging narcissists who are turning children into their brood of narcissistic supply.
Samuel's first book, My First Pride, doesn't have an age range, but it's probably suitable for 5 to 7-year-olds. On the front cover of the book, along with the two-spirit flag and the asexual flag, there's a polyamory flag to be inclusive of those families where there are multiple sexual partners. James Lindsay sees Drag Queen Story Hour as ideological grooming.
There's an academic paper that was written, it was published last year, in 2021, at the beginning of the year, written by a drag queen and a trans person. And in the paper, which is about drag pedagogy, that's the title of the paper. I just did a podcast on it. I read through the entire paper for a New Discourses podcast on my platform. They actually explain that, we sell it. We know it's a strategic thing. We sell this paper, or with this program, Drag Queen Story Hour, as though it's about raising empathy for LGBTQ people, but that's not what it's really about. It's really about focusing on the drag queen and teaching people to live queerly. We actually have other agendas. They actually say in the paper, we sell the idea that it's about empathy, but it's not really about empathy. It's about other things. So they know. In another place in the paper, they explain that they brand it as family friendly so that it's acceptable, but they kind of with a wink acknowledge that what they mean by family is the queer family you leave your real family for when you come out on the street. And I wish I was making this up, but that's what they actually say. So there's an element to where the people doing this know they're doing it. And they have even proudly written that they know they're doing it. And that they're billing it as family friendly and as a generative pedagogy and all of this nonsense, specifically because it enables them to sell it. But in the same paper, since we mentioned Foucault, what they're saying is, let me just read this little piece here, because I couldn't find the piece that I wanted to very quickly while we're talking, but this part right here ties this really together. It's talking about classroom management, and it says classroom management as a framework relies on rules and procedures as a sort of factory model for quality control. That's a weird way to think about managing a classroom, but okay. It says it stifles creativity and aims toward order, marching toward a mirage of identical outcomes and efficient productivity. This reinforces what Michel Foucault called the carceral continuum, which disproportionately funnels minoritized students toward prisons and other forms of confinement. So they're framing it out in terms of the idea that if we manage the classroom and we don't, the next thing that they talk about is, as an art form, drag is all about bending and breaking the rules. And so what they're trying to get to is that if we don't teach children to break the rules with adults that are in sexualized environments, and in fact, they say that to believe that there are no rules, to question every rule in a situation with adults dressed up as sexualized women doing performances with children. I'll just put that point back on it. If we don't do that, then we're actually engaging in what Foucault called the carceral continuum, which isn't just a school to prison pipeline like they allege here. It's the belief that life itself, because of the social constructions, imprisons everybody. Everybody is in a prison. Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. It's warmed over Rousseau for the 5th time until you've heated up the spaghetti so much it's just kind of a bowl of mush.
Yeah.
But that you can see that they know what there's an element where they know what they're doing, and they say in this paper that the point of it is to induce children to learn, and I quote, they put it even in italics inside of their own paper, to live queerly.
Right.
It's
Right.
groomers.
Yeah.
There's not another word for that.
Samuel has been invited in to talk to children at Lewis Pengam School, Caerphilly. Those parents who would prefer that their child wasn't groomed may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales. Links are included below.